Book 3, Section 1. Actions voluntary and involuntary. Virtue or excellence is, as we have seen, concerned with emotions and actions. When these are voluntary, we receive praise and blame. When involuntary, we are pardoned and even sometimes pitied. Therefore, it is, dare I say, indispensable for a student of virtue to differentiate between voluntary and involuntary actions, and useful also for lawyers to help them in meting out honors and punishments. It is, of course, generally recognized that actions done under constraint or due to ignorance are involuntary. An act is done under constraint when the initiative or source of motion comes from without. It is the kind of act in which the agent or the person acted upon contributes nothing. For example, a wind might carry a person somewhere he did not want to go, or men may do so who have him in their power. But a problem arises in regard to actions that are done through fear of a greater evil, or for some noble purpose. For instance, if a tyrant were to use a man's parents or children as hostages, in ordering him to commit a base deed, making their survival or death dependent on compliance or refusal. Are actions of this kind voluntary or involuntary? A similar problem also arises when a cargo is jettisoned in a storm. Considering the action itself, nobody would voluntarily throw away property, but when it is a matter of saving one's own life and that of his fellow passengers, any sensible man would do so. Actions of this kind are then of mixed nature, although they come closer to being voluntary than being involuntary actions, for they are desirable at the moment of action, and the end for which an action is performed depends on the time at which it is done. Thus, the terms voluntary and involuntary are to be used with reference to the moment of action. In the cases just mentioned, the agent acts voluntarily because the initiative in moving the parts of the body which act as instruments rests with the agent himself. And where the source of motion is within oneself, it is in one's power to act or not to act. Such actions, then, are voluntary, although in themselves they are perhaps involuntary, since nobody would choose to do any one of them for its own sake. That actions of this kind are considered as voluntary is also shown by the fact that sometimes people are even praised for doing them. For example, if they endure shameful or painful treatment in return for great and noble objectives. If the opposite is the case, reproach is heaped upon them, for only a worthless man would endure utter disgrace for no good or reasonable purpose. There are some instances in which such actions elicit forgiveness rather than praise. For example, when a man acts improperly under a strain greater than human nature can bear, in which no one could endure. Yet, there are perhaps also acts which no man can possibly be compelled to do, but rather than do them, he should accept the most terrible sufferings and death. Thus, the circumstances that compel Alcmaeon in Euripides' play to kill his own mother are patently absurd. In making a choice, it is sometimes hard to decide what advantages and disadvantages should be weighed against one another, and what losses we should endure to gain what we want. But it is even harder to abide by a decision once it is made. For as a rule, what we look forward to is painful, and what we are forced to do is base. It is because of this difficulty that praise or blame depends on whether or not a man successfully resists compulsion. What kind of actions can we say, then, are done under constraint? To state the matter without qualification, are all actions done under constraint of which the cause is external and to which the agent contributes nothing? On the other hand, actions which are themselves involuntary, yet chosen under given circumstances in return for certain benefits and performed on the initiative of the agent, although such actions are involuntary considered in themselves, they are none the less voluntary under the circumstances, and because benefits are expected in return. In fact, they have a greater resemblance to voluntary actions, for actions belong among particulars, and the particular act here is performed voluntarily. But it is not easy to lay down rules how, in making a choice. Two alternatives are to be balanced against one another. There are many differences in the case of particulars. There is a conceivable objection to this definition of voluntary. Suppose someone were to assert that pleasant and noble acts are performed under constraint because the pleasant and noble are external to us and have a compelling power. But on this view, all actions will be done under constraint, for every man is motivated by what is pleasant and noble in everything he does. Furthermore, it is painful to act under constraint and involuntarily, but the performance of pleasant and noble acts brings pleasure. Finally, it is absurd to blame external circumstances rather than oneself for falling an easy prey to such attractions and to hold oneself responsible for noble deeds, while pleasure is held responsible for one's base deeds. It appears thus that an act done under constraint is one in which the initiative or source of motion comes from without, and to which the person compelled contributes nothing. Turning now to acts due to ignorance, we may say that all of them are non-voluntary, but they are involuntary only when they bring sorrow and regret in their train. A man who has acted due to ignorance and feels no compunction whatsoever for what he has done was not a voluntary agent, since he did not know what he was doing, nor yet was he involuntary inasmuch as he feels no sorrow. There are, therefore, two distinct types of acts due to ignorance. A man who regrets what he has done is considered an involuntary agent, and a man who does not may be called a non-voluntary agent. As for the two cases are different, it is better to give each its own name. There also seems to be a difference between actions due to ignorance and acting in ignorance. A man's action is not considered to be due to ignorance when he is drunk or angry, but due to intoxication and anger. Although he does not know what he is doing, it is in fact acting in ignorance. Now every wicked man is in a state of ignorance as to what he ought to do and what he should refrain from doing, and it is due to this kind of error that men become unjust, in general immoral. But an act can hardly be called involuntary if the agent is ignorant of what is beneficial. Ignorance in moral choice does not make an act involuntary, it makes it wicked, nor does ignorance of the universal, for that invites reproach. Rather, it is ignorance of the particulars which constitute the circumstances and the issues involved in the action. It is on these that pity and pardon depend, for a person who acts in ignorance of a particular circumstance acts involuntarily. It might, therefore, not be a bad idea to distinguish and enumerate these circumstances. There are ignorance of 1. Who the agent is, 2. What he is doing, 3. What thing or person is affected, and sometimes also 4. The means he is using, e.g., some tool. 5. The result intended by his action, e.g., saving a life. And 6. The manner in which he acts, e.g., gently or violently. Now, no one except a madman will be ignorant of all these factors, nor can he obviously be ignorant of 1, the agent. For how could a man not know his own identity? But a person might be ignorant of 2, what he is doing. For example, he might plead that something slipped out of his mouth or that he did not know that he was divulging a secret, as Aeschylus said when he was accused of divulging the mysteries, or again, as a man might do who discharges a catapult, he might allege that it went off accidentally while he only wanted to show it. Moreover, 3, someone might, like Merope, make a son for an enemy, or 4, he might mistake a pointed spear for a foil, or a heavy stone for a pumice stone. Again, 5, someone might, in trying to save a man by giving him something to drink, in fact kill him, or 6, as in sparring a man might intend to merely to touch and actually strike a blow. As ignorance is possible with regard to all these factors which constitute an action, a man who acts in ignorance of any one of them is considered as acting involuntarily, especially if he is ignorant of the most important factors. The most important factors are the thing or person affected by the action and result. An action upon this kind of ignorance is called involuntary, provided that it brings also sorrow and regret in its train. Since an action is involuntary when it is performed under constraint or through violence, A voluntary action would seem to be one in which the initiative lies with the agent who knows the particular circumstance in which the action is performed. This implies that acts due to passion and appetite are voluntary. For perhaps it is wrong to call involuntary those acts which are due to passion and appetite. For on that assumption, we would in the first place deny that animals or even children are capable of acting voluntarily. In the second place, do we perform none of the actions that are motivated by appetite and passion voluntarily? Or do we perform noble acts voluntarily and base acts involuntarily? The latter alternative is ridiculous, since the cause in both cases is one and the same. But it is no doubt also absurd to call those things which we ought to desire involuntary. For in some cases we should be angry, and there are some things for which we should have an appetite, as for example, health and learning. Moreover, we think of involuntary actions as painful, while actions that satisfy our appetite are pleasant. And finally, what difference is there as far as involuntaries is concerned between a wrong committed after calculation and a wrong committed in a fit of passion? Both are to be avoided, but the irrational emotions are considered no less a part of the human beings than reasoning is, and hence the actions of a man which spring from passion and appetite are equally a part of him. It would be absurd then to count them as involuntary. Section 2. Choice. After this definition of voluntary and involuntary actions, our next task is to discuss choice. For choice seems to be very closely related to virtue, and to be a more reliable criterion for judging character than actions are. Choice clearly seems to be something voluntary, but it is not the same as voluntariness. Voluntariness is a wider term, for even children and animals have a share in the voluntary, but not in choice. Also, we can describe an act done on the spur of the moment as a voluntary act, but not the result of choice. It seems to be a mistake to identify choice, as some people do, with appetite, passion, wish, or some form of opinion. For choice is not shared by irrational creatures, whereas appetite and passion are. Moreover, the acts of a morally weak person are accompanied by appetite, but not by choice, while a morally strong person acts from choice, but not from appetite. Also, appetite can be opposed to choice, but not appetite to appetite. Again, appetite deals with what is pleasant and painful, while choice deals neither with the pleasant nor the painful. The resemblance between choice and passion is even slighter, for an act due to passion hardly seems to be based on choice. Choice is not even the same as wish, although the two seem to be close to one another. For choice does not have the impossible as its object, and if anyone were to assert that he was choosing the impossible, he would be considered a fool. But wish can be for the impossible, e.g., immortality. Wish has an object, also those things which cannot be possibly attained through our own agency. We might, for instance, wish for the victory of a particular actor or a particular athlete, but no one chooses such things, for we choose only what we believe might be attained through our own agency. Furthermore, wish is directed at the end rather than the means, but choice at the means which are conducive to a given end. For example, we wish to be healthy and choose the things that will give us health. Similarly, we say that we wish to be happy and describe this as our wish, but it would not be fitting to say that we choose to be happy. In general, choice seems to be concerned with the things that lie within our power. Again, choice cannot be identified with opinion, for opinion may refer to any matter, the eternal and the impossible no less than things within our power. Also, opinions are characterized by their truth or falsity, not by their moral goodness or badness as choices are. Now, perhaps no one identifies choice with opinion in general, but it would not even be correct to identify it with some particular opinion. For our character is determined by our choosing good or evil, not by the opinions we hold. We choose to take or avoid a good or an evil, but we hold opinions as to what thing is, whom it will benefit, or how. But the decision to take or avoid is by no means an opinion. Also, a choice is praised for being directed to the proper object or for being correctly made, but opinions are praised for being true. Moreover, we make the choice of things which we definitely know to be good, whereas we form opinions about what we do not quite know. Nor does it seem that the same people make the best choices and also hold the best opinions. Some hold rather good opinions, but because of a moral depravity, they do not make the right choice. Whether opinion precedes or follows choice is immaterial, for we are not concerned with this problem, but only whether choice is to be identified with some form of opinion. Since choice, then, is none of the things mentioned, what is it, or what kind of thing? As we have said, it clearly seems to be something voluntary, but not everything voluntary is the object of choice. Could it be the result of preceding deliberation? This is probably correct, for choice involves reason and thought. The very name choice seems to suggest that it is something chosen before other things. 3. Deliberation. To turn to deliberation, do people deliberate about everything? And is everything an object of deliberation? Or are there some things about which one cannot deliberate? Perhaps we ought to say that an object of deliberation is what a sensible man would deliberate about, but not a fool or madman. Now, nobody deliberates about the eternal, such as the order of the universe or the incommensurability of the diagonal and the side of the square. Nor, on the other hand, do we deliberate about things that are in motion if they always occur in the same way, whether by sheer necessity, by nature, or by some other cause. For example, we do not deliberate about solstices and sunrises. Neither do we deliberate about irregular occurrences such as drought or rain, nor about chance events such as the discovery of a treasure. We do not even deliberate about anything and everything that concerns man. No Spartan deliberates about what form of government will be best for the Scythians, for none of these things can happen through our agency. But what we do deliberate about are things that are in our power and can be realized in action. In fact, these are the only things that remain to be considered. For in addition to nature, necessity, and chance, we regard as casual principles, intelligence, and anything done through human agency. But, of course, different groups of people deliberate only about what is attainable by their own actions. Also, there can be no deliberation in any science that is exact and self-contained, such as writing the letters of the alphabet. We have no differences of opinion as to how they are written. Rather, we deliberate about matters which are done through our own agency, though not always in the same manner, e.g., about questions of medicine or of acquiring wealth. We deliberate more about navigation than about physical training because navigation is less exact in discipline. The same principle can also be applied to the other branches of knowledge, but we deliberate more about the arts than about the sciences, since we have more differences of opinion about them. Deliberation, then, operates in matters that hold good as general rule, but whose outcome is unpredictable, and in cases in which an indeterminate element is involved. When great issues are at stake, we distrust our own abilities as insufficient to decide the matter and call in others to join us in our deliberations. We deliberate not about ends, but about the means to attain ends. No physician deliberates whether he should cure, no orator whether he should be convincing, no statesman whether he should establish law and order, nor does any expert deliberate about the end of his profession. We take the end for granted and then consider in what manner and by what means it can be realized. If it becomes apparent that there is more than one means by which it can be attained, we look for the easiest and best. If it can be realized by one means only, we consider in what manner it can be realized by what means and how that means can be achieved in its turn. We continue that process until we come to the first link in the chain of causation, which is the last step in order to discovery. For when a man deliberates, he seems to be seeking something and to be analyzing his problem in the manner described as he would a geometrical figure. The last step in the analysis is at once the first in constructing the figure. By the way, it seems that not all investigation is deliberation. Mathematical investigation is not, though every deliberation is an investigation. Moreover, if in the process of investigation we encounter an insurmountable obstacle, for example, if we need money and none can be procured, we abandon our investigation. But if it turns out to be positive, we begin to act. By possible, I mean those things which can be realized through our own agency, for even what our friends do for us is, in a way, done through our own agency. Since the initiative is our own, sometimes the object of our investigation is to find the instruments we need and sometimes discover how to use them. The same is true of other matters too. Sometimes we have to find what the means are, and sometimes how they are used or through whom they can be acquired. To sum up our conclusions, 1. A man is the source of his actions. 2. Deliberation is concerned with things attainable by human action. And 3. Actions aim at ends other than themselves. For we cannot deliberate about ends, but about the means by which ends can be attained. Nor can we deliberate about particular facts, e.g., whether this is a loaf of bread or whether this loaf of bread has been properly baked. Such facts are the object of sense perception, and if we continue deliberating each point in turn, we shall have to go on to infinity. The object of deliberation and the object of choice are identical, except that the object of choice has already been determined since it has been decided upon on the basis of deliberation. For every man stops inquiring how he is to act when he has traced the initiative of action back to himself into the dominant part of himself. It is this part that exercises choice. This may be illustrated by the ancient political systems represented in Homer, where the kings would make a choice and then proclaim it to the people. Since, then, the object of choice is something within our power which we desire as a result of deliberation, we may define choice as a deliberate desire for things that are within our power. We arrive at a decision on the basis of deliberation and then let the deliberation guide our desire. So much for an outline of choice, its objects, and the fact that it is concerned with means rather than ends. Section 4. Wish. That wish is concerned with the end has already been stated. Now, some people think that its object is the good, and others think that it is what seems good. Those who maintain what it is the good are faced with the conclusion that a man who makes a wrong choice does not really wish what he wishes, for if it is the object of his wish, it must be good, while in the case in question, it is actually bad. On the other hand, those who assert that the object of wish is what seems good must conclude that nothing is by nature the object of wish, but only what seems good to a particular individual. Yet different, in many instances, opposite things seem good to different individuals. If these consequences are unacceptable, we must not admit that in an unqualified sense and from the standpoint of truth, the object of which is the good, but that for each individual, it is whatever seems good to him. This distinction solves the problem. Thus, what seems good to a man of high moral standards is truly the object of wish, whereas a worthless man wishes anything that strikes his fancy. It is the same with the human body. People whose constitution is good find those things wholesome, which really are so, while other things are wholesome for invalids, and similarly their opinions will vary as to what is bitter, sweet, hot, heavy, and so forth. Just as a healthy man judges these matters correctly, so in moral questions. A man whose standards are high judges correctly, and in each case what is truly good will appear to him to be so. Thus, what is good and pleasant differs with different characteristics or conditions, and perhaps the chief distinction of a man of high moral standards is the ability to see the truth in each particular moral question, since he is, as it were, the standard and measure for such questions. The common run of people, however, are misled by pleasure, for though it is not the good it seems to be, so that they choose the pleasant in belief that it is good and avoid pain, thinking that it is evil. Section 5. Man as a responsible agent. Now, since the end is the object of wish, and since the means to the end are the objects of deliberation and choice, it follows that actions concerned with means are based on choice and are voluntary actions, and the activities in which the virtues find their expression deal with means. Consequently, virtue or excellence depends on ourselves, and so does vice. For where it is in our power to act, it is also in our power not to act. and where we can say no, we can also say yes. Therefore, if we have the power to act where it is noble to act, we also have the power not to act where not to act is base. And conversely, if we have the power not to act where inaction is noble, we also have the power to act where action is base. But if we have the power to act nobly or basely, and likewise the power not to act, and if such action or inaction constitutes our being good and evil, we must conclude that it depends on us whether we are decent or worthless individuals. The saying that no one is voluntarily wicked nor involuntarily happy seems to be partly false and partly true. That no one is involuntarily happy is true, but wickedness is voluntary. If we do not accept that, we must contradict the conclusions at which we have just arrived and must deny that man is the source and begetter of his actions as a father of his children. But if our conclusions are accepted and we cannot trace back our actions to starting points other than those within ourselves, then all actions in which the initiative lies in ourselves are in our power and are voluntary actions. These conclusions are corroborated by the judgment of private individuals and by the practice of lawgivers. They chastise and punish evildoers except those who have acted under constraint or due to some ignorance for which they are not responsible, but honor those who act nobly. Their intention seems to be to encourage the latter and to deter the former. Yet nobody encourages us to perform what is not within our power and what is not voluntary. There would be no point in trying to stop by persuasion a man from feeling hot, in pain, or hungry, and so forth, because we will go on feeling these conditions no less for that. Even ignorance is in itself no protection against punishment if a person is thought to be responsible for his ignorance. For example, the penalty is twice as high if the offender acted in a state of drunkenness because the initiative is his own. He had the power not to get drunk, and drunkenness was responsible for his ignorance. Moreover, punishment is inflicted for offenses committed in ignorance of such provisions of the law as the offender ought to have known or might easily have known. It is also inflicted in other cases in which ignorance seems to be due to negligence. It was in the offender's power not to be ignorant, it is argued, and he could have made sure had he wanted to. But it might be objected. Carelessness may be part of a man's character, we counter. However, by asserting that a man is himself responsible for becoming careless, because he lives in a loose and carefree manner, he is likewise responsible for being unjust or self-indulgent. If he keeps on doing mischief or spending his time in drinking and the like, for a given kind of activity produces a corresponding character. This is shown by the way in which people train themselves for any kind of contest or performance. They keep on practicing for it. Thus, only a man who is utterly insensitive can be ignorant to the fact that moral characteristics are formed by actively engaging in particular actions. Moreover, it is unreasonable to maintain that a man who acts unjustly or self-indulgently does not wish to be unjust or self-indulgent. If a man is not ignorant of what he is doing when he performs acts which will make him unjust, he will of course become unjust voluntarily, nor, again, can wishing any more make him stop being unjust and become just than it can make a sick man healthy. Let us assume the case of a man who becomes ill voluntarily through living a dissolute life and disobeying doctor's orders. In the beginning, before he let his health slip away, he could have avoided becoming ill. But once you have thrown a stone and let it go, you can no longer recall it, even though the power to throw it was yours, for the initiative was within you. Similarly, since an unjust or self-indulgent man initially had the possibility not to become unjust or self-indulgent, he has acquired these traits voluntarily. But once he has acquired them, it is no longer possible for him not to be what he is. There are some cases in which not only the vices of the soul, but also those of the body are voluntary and are accordingly criticized. Nobody blames the man for being ugly by nature, but we do blame those who become ugly through lack of exercise and through taking no care of their person. The same applies to infirmities and physical handicaps. Everyone would pity rather than reproach a man who is blind by nature or whose blindness is due to disease or accident. but all would blame him if it were caused by drunkenness or some other form of self-indulgence. In other words, those bodily vices which depend on ourselves are blamed, and those which do not are not blamed. This being so, we may conclude that other kinds of vice for which we are blamed also depend upon ourselves. But someone might argue as follows: all men seek what appears good to them, but they have no control over how things appear to them, and the end appears differently to different men. If we reply the individual is somehow responsible for his own characteristics, he is similarly responsible for what appears to him to be good. But if he is not so responsible, no one is responsible for his own wrongdoing. But everyone does wrong through ignorance of the proper end, since he believes that his actions will bring him the greatest good. However, the aim we take for the end is not determined by the choice of which enables him to make correct judgments and to choose what is truly good. To be well endowed by nature means to have his natural gift. For to be well and properly provided by nature with the greatest and noblest of gifts, a gift which can be got or learned from no one else, but which is one's possession in the form of which nature has given it, that is the meaning of being well endowed by nature in the full and true sense of the word. But if this theory is true, how will virtue be any more voluntary than vice? The end has been determined for and appears to a good man and a bad man alike by nature or something of that sort, and both will use the end thus determined as the standard for any actions they may undertake. Thus, whether the end that appears to be good to a particular person, whatever it may be, is not simply given to him by nature, but is to some extent due to himself, or whether, though the end is given by nature, virtue is voluntary in the sense that a man of high moral standards performs the actions that lead up to the end voluntarily. In either case, vice too is bound to be no less voluntary than virtue. For like the good man, the bad man has the requisite ability to perform actions through his own agency, even if not to formulate his own ends. If then our assertion is correct, viz., that the virtues are voluntary because we share in some way the responsibility of our own characteristics, and because the end we set up for ourselves are determined by the kind of person we are, it follows that the vices too are voluntary, for the same is true of all of them. To sum up, we have checked the virtues in general and have given an outline of the genus to where they belong, i.e., that they are means and that they are characteristics. We have stated that they spontaneously tend to produce the same kind of actions as those to which they owe their existence, that they are in our power and voluntary, and that they follow the dictates of right reason. However, our actions and our characteristics are not voluntary in the same sense. We are in control of our actions from beginning to end, insofar as we know the particular circumstances surrounding them. But we control only the beginning of our characteristics. The particular steps in their development are imperceptible, just as they are in the spread of a disease. Yet since the power to behave or not to behave in a given way was ours in the first place, our characteristics are voluntary. Let us resume our discussion of the various virtues. What are they? What sort of thing do they deal? With what sort of thing do they deal, and how do they operate? The answer to these questions will also tell us how many virtues there are. Section 6. Courage in its sphere of operation. First of all, courage. That is a mean with respect to fear, and confidence has already been shown, or confidence has already been shown. What we fear is obviously something fearful, and this is, in general, something evil. Hence, it is that some people define fear as the expectation of evil. Now, it is true that we fear all evils, like disrepute, poverty, disease, friendlessness, death, but it does not seem that a courageous man is concerned with all of these. There are some evils such as disrepute, which are proper and right for him to fear and wrong not to fear. A man who fears disrepute is a decent and has a sense of shame. A man who does not fear it is shameless. Still, some people describe a man who fears no disrepute as courageous, in a metaphorical sense. For he resembles a courageous man, in that a courageous man too is fearless. Perhaps one should not fear poverty or disease, or generally any evil that does not spring from vice, or is not due to oneself. However, it is not the man who has no fear of these things who is courageous, but we call him so because of his resemblance to the courageous man. For some people who are cowards on the battlefield are generous and face the loss of money cheerfully. On the other hand, a man is not a coward if he fears insult to his wife and children, or if he fears envy or the like, nor is he courageous, if he is of good cheer when he is about to be flogged. What kind of fearful things, then, are the concern of the courageous man? No doubt those of the greatest moment. No person endures what is terrifying more steadfastly than he. Now the most fearful thing of all is death, for it is the end, and once a man is dead, it seems that there's no longer anything good or evil for him. But it would seem that not even death shows the courage of a man in all circumstances. For example, death by drowning or by disease does not. What kind of death, then, does bring out courage? Doubtless the noblest kind, and that in death is death in battlefield, for in battlefield a man is faced by the greatest and most noble of dangers. This is corroborated by the honors which states as well as monarchs bestow upon courage. Properly speaking, therefore, we might define as courageous a man who fearlessly faces a noble death and any situation that brings a sudden death. Such eventualities are usually brought about by war, but of course a courageous man is also fearless at sea and in illness, though not in the same way as sailors are. Because of their experience, the sailors are optimistic, while the courageous man has given up hope of saving his life, but finds the thought of such an inglorious death revolting. Furthermore, circumstances which bring out courage are those in which a man can show his prowess or where he can die a noble death, either of which is true of death by drowning or illness. Section 7. Courage, its nature and its opposites. Now, the same things are not fearful to all people, and there are some things of which we say that they surpass human endurance. The latter are fearful at the least to every sensible person, but terrors which are humanly bearable differ in magnitude and degree, and so do the circumstances that inspire confidence. Now, the courageous man is dauntless as a human being, hence he will fear what is fearful, but he will endure it in the right way, and as reason directs for the sake of acting nobly. That is, in the end of virtue. It is, of course, possible to fear things to a greater or lesser degree, and also to fear what is not fearful. Errors arise from fearing what one should not, fearing in the wrong manner, fearing at the wrong time, and so on. And similarly with events that inspire confidence. Accordingly, he is courageous who endures and fears the right things, for the right motive, in the right manner, and at the right time, and who displays confidence in a similar way. For a courageous man feels and acts according to the merits of each case and as reason guides him. Now, the end of every activity corresponds to the characteristic that produces it. This also applies to a courageous man. Courage is noble, and accordingly its end is noble too, for a thing defined by its end. Thus it is for a noble end that a courageous man endures and acts as courage demands. To turn to the types of excess. There is no name for a man who exceeds in lack of fear. We have stated earlier that many qualities have no name. But he must be a madman or immune to pain if he fears nothing. Neither earthquake nor flood, as they say of the Celts. He who exceeds in confidence in fearful situation is called reckless. A reckless man is usually thought of as boastful and as someone who pretends to have courage. At any rate, he wants to appear to behave in a fearful situation as a courageous man really behaves. Therefore, he imitates him whenever the situation enables him to do so. Hence, most reckless men are reckless cowards. They put on a show of confidence when the situation permits, but do not stand their ground when there is something to fear. A man who exceeds in fear is a coward. He fears the wrong things in the wrong manner, and so forth, all the way down the list. He is also deficient in confidence, but his excessive fear in painful situations is more obvious. A coward is a pessimistic sort of fellow, for he fears everything. But a courageous man is the very opposite, because confidence implies optimism. To sum up, a coward, a reckless man, and a courageous man are all concerned with the same situations, but their attitudes toward them are different. The former two show excess and deficiency, while the courageous man keeps to the median and behaves as he ought. Further, reckless men are impetuous, and though they are eager before danger comes, they keep out of it when it is there. Courageous men, on the other hand, are keen in the thick of action, but calm beforehand. Courage, as we have stated, is a mean concerning matters that inspire confidence and fear. In the situations described, it chooses and endures what it does because it is noble to do so or base to refuse. But to seek death as an escape from poverty, love, or some other painful experience is to be a coward rather than a man of courage. For to run away from troubles is softness, and such a man does not endure death because it is noble, but because he is fleeing from evil. Section 8. Qualities similar to courage. So much for our discussion of what courage is. However, there are 5 further types of character to which this name is also applied. 1. There is, in the first place, because of its close resemblance to true courage, the courage of the citizen soldier. Citizens, it seems, endure dangers because the laws and customs penalize and stigmatize them if they do not, and honor them if they do. Hence, those people are considered the most courageous, among whom cowards are held in dishonor and courageous men in honor. It is this very type of courage which Homer describes in such characters as Diomedes and Hector. Polydamas will be first to put a reproach on me, and, for some day, Hector will say openly before the Trojans, the son of Titus running before me. This kind of courage bears the closest resemblance to the one we have described earlier, in that it is motivated by virtue, that is, by a sense of shame and by the desire for a noble object, to wit, honor, and avoidance of reproaching as something base. We might include under this head also those who are forced to act by their superiors. They are, however, inferior to the previous case, inasmuch as they are promoted not by a sense of shame, but by fear, and because what they try to avoid is not baseness, but pain. Their masters exert compulsion, as Hector does when he says, "But if I shall see any man who cowers and stays out of battle, him nothing shall save to escape from the dogs." Field commanders do the self-same thing when they beat their troops if the latter retreat, and when they line them up with a trench or something of the sort behind them. They all use compulsion, but courageous action ought to be motivated not by compulsion, but by the fact that it is noble. Secondly, the experience in facing particular dangers is believed to be courage. Socrates, for this very reason, thought of courage was knowledge. Different people exhibit this kind of courage under different circumstances, but in warfare, professional soldiers are especially noted for it, for they have the best insight into the many false alarms which war seems to bring with it. They give the impression of being courageous because the others do not know what is happening. Moreover, their experience enables them to be efficient in attack and in defense, for they are capable of using arms and are equipped with the best for offensive as well as defensive purposes. Therefore, they fight with the advantage armed men have over unarmed or trained athletes over amateurs. For in athletic contests, it is not the most courageous who are the best fighters, but the strongest and those who are physically best conditioned. When the strain of danger becomes too great, however, and when they are inferior in men and equipment, professional soldiers turn cowards. They are the first to run away, while the citizen militia stand their ground and die as happened at the temple of Hermes. For citizens fight in disgraceful and death, preferable to saving one's life on these terms. But the professionals go to face danger from the very outset in the belief that they are stronger, and once they realize that they are mistaken, they run away, fearing death more than this disgrace. But this sort of thing is not courage. Thirdly, a spirited temper is classified as courage. When men, in a fit of temper, become like wild beasts and turn on those who have wounded them, They are considered courageous because courageous men are spirited. For nothing makes a man as ready to encounter dangers as a spirited temper. That is why Homer is full of expressions like, he put strength into his spirit, and he aroused his might and spirit, and bitter fierceness welled up through his nostrils, and his blood boiled. For all such expressions seem to describe spirited temper as it is aroused and goes into action. Now, courageous men act the way they do because it is noble, and a spirited temper gives them support. But wild beasts are motivated by pain. They attack only when they are wounded or scared, but not when they are left in peace in a forest. Thus, they are not courageous because they are spurred by pain and aroused temper to rush into danger without foreseeing any of the perils that are in store for them. On this basis, even asses would be courageous when they are hungry, for no beating can make them budge from their pasture. Adulterers, too, are prompted by lust to do many daring things. However, the kind of courage that comes from a spirited temper seems to be the most natural and become true courage when choice and purpose are added to it. Moreover, anger gives men pain and revenge pleasure. And although those who fight for these motives are good fighters, they are not courageous, for it is not the incentive of what is noble that makes them fight, and they are not guided by reason but by emotion. However, they have something which closely resembles courage. 4. Nor are optimists courageous, for they gain their confidence in danger from having won many victories over many people. They resemble courageous men in that both are confident. Confidence of courageous men, however, is inspired by the motives discussed above, while the confidence of optimists is based on their belief that they are the strongest and will suffer no harm. People behave the same way when drunk. Drinking makes them optimists, but when things turn out contrary to their expectation, they run away. On the other hand, a courageous man, as we have seen, is characterized by the fact that he endures what is fearful to man and what seems fearful to him, because to do so is noble, and to do otherwise is base. For that reason, it is a mark of even greater courage to be fearless and unruffled when suddenly faced with a terrifying situation than when danger is clear beforehand. For the reaction is more prone to be due to a characteristic, since it is less dependent on preparation. When we see what is coming, we can make a choice based on calculation and guided by reason. But when a situation arises suddenly, our actions are determined by our characteristics. 5. Finally, people who act in ignorance of their danger give the impression of being courageous. In fact, they are not far removed from the optimist, but they are inferior in that they have none of the self-reliance which enables the optimist to hold their ground for some time. Once the ignorant realize, however, that the situation is not what they suspected it was, they are deceived and run away. This is what happened to the Argives when they encountered the Spartans and took them for Ciconians. So much for a description of the nature of the courageous man and of those who are believed to be courageous. Section 9. Courage, its relation to pleasure and pain. Although courage is concerned with feelings of confidence and of fear, it is not concerned with both to an equal extent, but deals more with situations that inspire fear. For he who has unruffled in such situations and shows the right attitude toward them. In fact, as we have pointed out, men are called courageous for enduring pain. Hence, courage is a painful thing and is justly praised because it is more difficult to endure what is painful than to abstain from what is pleasant. Nevertheless, it would seem that the end which courage aims at is pleasant, obscured though it is by the attendant circumstances. Take athletic contests, for example. For boxers at the end was pleasant. The object for which they fight, the wreath and the honors, though the blows they receive hurt them, since they are made of flesh and blood, and are painful as is all their exertion. Since these painful elements are so great in number, the goal of the fight appears small and devoid of anything pleasant. If the same thing is also true of courage, death and wounds will be painful for a courageous man, and he will suffer them unwillingly, but he will endure them because it is noble to do so, or base to do otherwise. And the closer a man is to having virtue or excellence in its entirety, and the happier he is, the more pain will death bring him. Life is more worth living for such a man than for anyone else, and he stands to lose the greatest goods and realizes, in fact, and that is painful, realizes that fact and that is painful. But he is no less courageous for that, and perhaps rather more so, since he chooses noble deeds in war in return for suffering and pain. According only in so far as it attains its end, is it true to say of every virtue that it is pleasant when practiced. But perhaps this does not mean to say that the men of true courage make the best professional soldiers. The best professionals are men who have less courage, but have nothing to lose, for they are willing to face dangers and will sell their lives for a small profit. So much for our discussion of courage. On the basis of what we have said, it is not difficult to comprehend, at least in our outline, what it is. Section 10. Self-control and its sphere of operation. After courage, let us discuss self-control, for these two seem to be virtues of our irrational part. We have stated earlier that self-control is a mean in regard to pleasures, for it is concerned with pain only to a lesser extent and in a different way. And self-indulgence, too, manifests itself in the same situations. Therefore, let us now define with what kind of pleasures it is concerned. We must first differentiate between the pleasures of the soul and the pleasures of the body. Take, for example, the pleasures of fulfilled ambition and love of learning. When the man who has attained his ambition and the man who loves learning finds joy in the thing he loves, it is not his body, but rather his thought that is affected. Men who indulge in these pleasures are called neither self-controlled nor self-indulgent. Similarly, these terms cannot be applied to men who can indulge in any pleasures other than those of the body. We call men who are fond of hearing and of telling stories and who spend their days in trivialities gossipy, but not self-indulgent, nor do we call self-indulgent those who feel pain at the loss of money or a friend. Self-control deals with the pleasures of the body, but not even with all of these. For people who find delight in visual objects such as colors, shapes, and pictures are called neither self-controlled nor self-indulgent. Still, even here it does seem possible to feel delight in the right manner, as well as excessively or deficiently. The same is true of the objects of sound. No one terms the self-indulgent who take an excessive delight in music or in theater, or self-controlled who enjoy it in the right manner. Nor do we apply these terms in connection with the sense of smell, except incidentally. Those who like the smell of fruit, roses, or incense we do not call self-indulgent, but rather those who like the smell of perfume or fine cooking. For it is in these things that self-indulgent people take delight, because they remind them of the objects of their appetite. True, one sees other people too finding delight in the smell of food when they are hungry, but only the self-indulgent is characterized by the delight he takes in such things, since to him they are the stimulants of appetite. Moreover, the lower animals derive no pleasure through these senses unless it be incidentally. Dogs do not take delight in smelling hairs, but in eating them. The smell only makes them perceive the hair, nor does the lion enjoy the lowing of an ox, but the devouring. The lowing, merely makes him perceive that the ox is close by, and consequently he seems to enjoy it. In the same way, it is not the sight of the stag or mountain goat that gives him joy, but the prospect of a meal. Thus, self-control and self-indulgence are concerned with such pleasures as we share with the other animals, and which therefore appear slavish and bestial. These are the pleasures of touch and taste, but they evidently involve little or no use of taste at that, for the function of taste consists in the discrimination of flavors, and that is what wine tasters and chefs do when they prepare delicacies. Now, these people do not find delight in discriminating flavors, or at any rate self-indulgent people do not, but in actual enjoyment of them, which comes about exclusively through touch in eating and in drinking as well as in sexual intercourse. That is why a certain gourmet prayed for a throat longer than a crane's, implying that he derived his pleasure from touch. The senses involved in self-indulgence are those most widely shared by living beings. It seems that self-indulgence is considered reprehensible for a good reason, for it inheres in us not as human beings but as animals. Therefore it is bestial to delight in such things and to be inordinately fond of them. As a matter of fact, the pleasures of touch in which free men are most often indulged, such as the massages and warm baths in the gymnasia, form an exception, for the pleasure of the self-indulgent is not produced by the touch of the whole body, but by the touch of some specific parts. Section 11, Self-control, its nature and its opposites. There seem to be two kinds of appetite. The first is shared by all. The second is peculiar to some individuals and is adventitious. For example, the appetite for nourishment is common to all and natural, since everyone who lacks food or drink, or occasionally both, has an appetite for it. And also, as Homer says, everyone who is young and vigorous has an appetite for sexual intercourse. But when it comes to appetite for some specific kind of food or sexual relation, not everybody shares it, nor do all have the appetite for the same things. This appetite, therefore, is evidently more personal. Still, it has something natural about it, for different people find different things pleasant, and some things are extraordinarily pleasant to everyone. Now, in the natural appetites, few people go wrong, and that in only one direction, namely excess. For to eat and to drink anything until one is more full than full is to exceed the natural amount, since natural appetite merely means filling a deficiency. For that reason, people who eat too much are called belly gorgers, inasmuch as they fill their stomachs beyond what is needed. Men who are all too slavish develop this trait. On the other hand, in the pleasures peculiar to individuals, many men go wrong in many ways. For while people are said to be partial to something, either because they find delight in things they should not, or because they find greater delight in them than most people do, or because they find them delightful in the wrong way, the self-indulgent exceed in all three respects. They enjoy some things that they should not, because they are detestable things. And if there are any such things that ought to be enjoyed, they enjoy them more than they should or more than most people do. It is thus evident that the excess in regard to pleasure is self-indulgence, and that it is reprehensible. But as far as pain is concerned, there is no difference between self-control and courage. A man is not called self-controlled because he can endure pain or self-indulgence, because he cannot. He is called self-indulgent for feeling more pain than he should and not getting his pleasure, so that it is pleasure which makes him feel pain, and self-controlled for not feeling pain at the absence or abstinence from his pleasure. A self-indulgent man has an appetite for everything, pleasant or for what is most pleasant, and he is driven by his appetite to choose pleasant things at the cost of everything else. As a result, he feels pain both when he fails to get what he wants and when he has an appetite for it. His appetite is accompanied by pain, although it seems strange to feel pain because of pleasure. On the other hand, men deficient in regard to pleasures, who find less delight in them than they should, are scarcely ever found, for such insensitivity is not human. Even the animals discriminate between different kinds of food and enjoy some and not others. If there is someone whom nothing is pleasant, and who does not differentiate one thing from another, he must be anything but a man. There is no name for such a creature, since he is scarcely to be found. A self-controlled man observes the mean in these matters. He takes no pleasure in what is most pleasant to the self-indulgent, but rather finds it disgusting. In general, he takes no pleasure in what he should not, and no excessive pleasure in touch and taste. He feels neither pain nor appetite, or only moderately when he does not have these pleasures. He feels them no more than he should, nor when he should not, and so forth. But all the pleasant things that contribute to his health and well-being he desires moderately and in the way he should, and also other pleasures as long as they are neither detrimental to health and well-being, nor incompatible with what is noble nor beyond his means. A man who does not observe these standards loves such pleasures more than they are worth. But a self-controlled man is of a different sort. He follows right reason. Section 12. Self-indulgence. Self-indulgence resembles voluntary action more than cowardice does, for it is motivated by pleasure, while cowardice is motivated by pain, and pleasure is something we choose, and pain something we avoid. Moreover, pain upsets and destroys the nature of the man who experiences it, but pleasure does nothing of the kind. Thus, self-indulgence is more voluntary than cowardice, For the same reason, it is also more reprehensible. In fact, it is easier to habituate oneself to withstand the attractions of pleasure, for life is full of them and habituations involves no danger, while the opposite is true of fearful situations. It would seem, however, that cowardice is more voluntary than particular cowardly acts. For while cowardice itself is free from pain, cowardly acts, though the pain they entail, so upset a man that he throws away his arms and disgraces himself in other ways. Hence, such acts are actually considered as done under constraint. The opposite is true of a self-indulgent man. In this case, the particular acts are voluntary, inasmuch as they are done with the appetite and desire, while the general characteristics are less so. No one has the urge to be self-indulgent. We apply the word self-indulgence also to the naughtiness of children, for this bears some resemblance to the self-indulgence we've been discussing. It makes no difference for our present purposes which of the two senses it is derived from the other. But obviously what comes later in life is named after what comes earlier. The metaphor seems to be quite good, for what desires the base, and what grows wild needs to be checked or pruned, and that is, above all, appetite and a child. For, like self-indulgent men, children live as their appetite directs them, and the desire for pleasure is especially strong in them. So, if appetite and desire do not obey and do not subject themselves to the ruling element, they will go far astray. For the desire for pleasure is insatiable in a senseless creature and knows no bounds, and the act of gratification of appetite will increase the appetite with which we were born. And if the appetites are great and intense, they push aside the power of reasoning. They should therefore, be moderate and few in number, and should never oppose the guidance of reason. That is what we mean by obedient and checked. And just as the child must live as his tutor bids him live, so the appetitive element in us must be guided by the bidding of reason. Consequently, the appetitive element of a self-controlled man must be in harmony with the guidance of reason. For the aim of both his appetite and his reason is to do what is noble. The appetite of a self-controlled man is directed at the right objects, in the right way, and at the right time, and this is what reason prescribes. So much for our discussion of self-control. That concludes Book 3.